So, welcome everyone. Today, we're delighted to be in conversation with an inspiring thinker and entrepreneur, Eric Ries. I started learning from Eric about a decade ago when he first published The Lean Startup, a book that ended up creating a large movement to spark entrepreneurship innovation across all sorts of organization. And his most recent book, The Startup Way, published a couple of years ago, was all about sparking and leveraging entrepreneurial energy across large established organizations, something that we are also very passionate about. And aside from writing amazing books, Eric is a serial entrepreneur, and his latest venture, the long-term stock exchange, may represent the most ambitious one to date. So thank you, Eric, for being with us today and in this conversation.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for having me. I'm delighted.
All right, so let's get right in it. And in your last book, The Startup Way, as I mentioned, you had some pretty scathing critiques about the way large organizations are run, and that some of the things that need to change, right, to unleash that entrepreneurial energy that you think is so important. So maybe you can start by sharing a little bit your critique. What do you think is broken in the way that large organizations are managed, they're organized, and led?
Well, ask any middle manager and they'll tell you. There's nothing new to this except that I feel like, this has been known for a long time that the way that we organize our institutions, in public and private for that matter, wastes a colossal amount of human energy solving problems that we don't have anymore in favor of ignoring problems that are really urgent for the 21st century. And I feel bad starting with the negative, but you said it was scathing, so I feel like it's just a fact of the situation. Again, go ask anybody who has to do these jobs for a living if they think their time is being well spent. Your average product manager spends like more than 50% of his time or her time defending the budget that they already had for their project. It's just a complete and total waste of time. But I think that it's important, and I try not to be aggressive when I'm working with managers, of course, because we have to acknowledge what general management has done well over the preceding century. I feel bad criticizing a system that literally clothes and feeds every one of us and makes possible this miraculous conversation that we're having now. So, if you think about the breakthroughs, starting with scientific management and Alfred Sloan and lean production and just this incredible array of thinkers who have figured out how we can produce more stuff than we know what to do with on this planet. Like scarcity is a political choice now. It is not actually any longer a fact of our material condition. So I think it's okay to take a moment and say thank you to the general managers who run supply chains of unfathomable complexity for keeping us all alive. Thank you all very much. But that system has been worked out pretty well now for a generation or more, depending on how you count. And there are an increasing number of problems that we face that have to do with overproduction and overconsumption, that have to do with the lethargy and bureaucracy that organizations can succumb to, and of course the new challenges caused by technology and disruption in the 21st century. And I don't think it's fair to demand that the org chart and structure that Alfred Sloan figured out for General Motors in the 1920s has to be the same one we use today. That's asking an awful lot of that one idea to carry us all this time. I think it's fair to say that some things have changed in the intervening century and maybe we could do a little better. So I think part of this is recognizing the strengths of traditional general management, using those tools for the problems that they excel at, and then allowing us to expand the management toolkit to encompass things that really harness and accelerate human creativity.
Yeah, let me jump in there, Eric. I mean, we would absolutely agree. If you think of management as a technology, which is kind of how we see it, it's simply the tools, the processes, the methods, the structures we use to do together what we can't do alone to aggregate human effort. Like undoubtedly, that's like way out on the flat part of the S curve. I mean, I think
Oh
we've
yeah.
been so thoughtful about that, and we've had our own little thing to say about that. So I guess I'd like to ask another question. Like why has it been so hard to change that 100 or 150-year-old model of industrial bureaucracy? We know it's not up for the new challenges. We see some companies that have kind of been able to get beyond it and unleash that entrepreneurial energy, but for the vast majority of companies they seem kind of stuck there. And just to use one analogy, I think today most leaders around the world, they can get their heads around radical business model innovation. They understand how different Netflix is from terrestrial television or Alipay from traditional banking. But when you say, can you imagine an organization that is as different from the status quo as those business innovations were? I think they struggle. So, as you've tried to do some of this work in organizations, what do you think? Like, why are we stuck?
I mean, it's such a ridiculous question to ask because the ideology of management in a capitalist system is so much about efficiency and competition and superiority. And I almost think it's a kind of self-delusion that because we've convinced ourselves that only the fittest can survive, we must thereby be the fittest, like a 21st century version of social Darwinism. So there's a mindset problem. There's simply an inability to imagine the possibility of change and a real resistance to people who bring change into organizations. And I don't mean the consultants. Companies love hiring consultants. It's like the paid entertainment, you know. But it's the change agents within the organization, right? Those managers that have the vision encounter tremendous obstacles and resistance. But I think it's wrong just to say that it's a mindset thing because there's also a material incentives issue here. Uh, the way that corporations increasingly have been structured, especially public corporations, people are being paid to maintain the status quo. And as that status quo kind of bias becomes more and more entrenched in our compensation structure, promotions, team construction, incentives, like as all those pieces start to become not only focused on making sure that everyone is paid to eliminate variation and therefore eliminate new ideas, we're also at the same time as a society taking the time horizon of those incentives and shortening and shortening and shortening and shortening. And that is a lethal combination. So you have a kind of a conservative status quo bias mindset combined with incentives that drive defense over the exploitation of new opportunities. And then you add on top of that the disease of short-term thinking. It's a pretty toxic brew.
So let's tackle that for a moment because you could make an argument that a large company is a perfect home for entrepreneurship. You have millions of customer relationships. You have often deep technical capabilities. You can afford to fund new projects that are fairly high risk. They're going to be a decimal point in your overall financial results. They're not going to make any material difference to investors in the short run. So why does this persist? I could make the argument that large companies are ideally designed to incubate and develop and do new things, and yet our experience says, boy, that doesn't happen. So what's gone wrong between what could be the ideal and what is?
Yeah, I'm glad that you framed it that way because if we were in an alternate universe where that was seen as the purpose of the corporation and someone said that we should switch from that idea to the idea we have now, I mean just imagine it's like one of those things that you would never switch to what we have now. No, you would never. No one can advocate for it or defend it. The best we can say is people think it's the best we can do. As flawed and bad as it is, we couldn't do better. But if we were doing better, you would never come back and say that this is superior. And again, the incredible waste of energy. Like how many companies can't not only do not support entrepreneurs, they tend to fire them. And then my favorite dysfunction is you fire someone who's like a difficult person. They don't play nice with others. They classic entrepreneur care more about outcomes and results than playing by the rules and social norms. And then they go out, they raise money, they start a startup, and you buy it back for an incredible markup. It's an unbelievable subsidy of my good friends on Sand Hill Road in the venture capital community. And listen, those are good friends of mine, and I'm happy for them to take the money. But people who acquire those companies, they celebrate that as a corp dev win. We just bought this company, and it's like, no, you need to understand this is an HR failure. The person already worked at your company when they had this idea, and they could have built that idea for you. And of course, in the entrepreneurship literature, the history is riddled with famous stories, like the time Steve Wozniak begged Hewlett Packard to let him build the Apple computer within HP. And he took it to every manager, every division, just begged anyone to just give him permission to do it. And so they said no, and he did it in his garage. And think about that. He did it in his garage. He didn't need to build a semiconductor fab. He didn't need hundreds of millions of dollars to build it. He was able to do it quite inexpensively. And the corporation could easily have afforded this experiment. So why not? I think I think we don't take seriously the idea that there are entrepreneurs within organizations.
You reminded me of a more recent example, which is Zoom and Eric Yuan, right? He was the head of WebEx software development.
Yeah.
He begged his bosses to, update WebEx for the cloud. They said, no, we got other priorities. We want to be into enterprise social networking. That's the thing we're going to go. So he went out and founded Zoom. And there was a point during the pandemic a few months ago when the market cap of Zoom was about the same as the market cap of Cisco.
Mhm.
Both were about $150 billion, and it's well striking. But as you say, like Cisco is and management is really paying no direct price for that, and there's like no real way for Cisco to quantify. I mean, that is actually a good illustration of the cost of inertia, right?
Mhm.
This opportunity costs you $150 billion in market cap, but somehow that's not reflected in the accounting,
Mhm.
right? In any way. So I'm
I
wondering.
gotta jump in there, Michele. No investors or ever ask a company like, what's the value of all the opportunities you
You
passed on
missed.
that you were
Yeah.
well positioned to do, and you simply didn't see it.
One of my favorite examples of that from the venture industry is I'm going to blank now. I think it's Bessemer Venture Partners who maintains an anti-portfolio of all the companies they chose not to invest in, and they
Mm,
periodically update it publicly for the market cap of all those investments and how they would have returned, and they
mhm,
disclose that to their limited partners. It's so smart, not just because it's not like people are like, oh, it's a very failure oriented, or it's like self-flagellation. It's like, no, everything has an opportunity cost. So yes, we made these returns. Think about all the companies that make a steady return and pay a consistent dividend to their shareholders, and the insiders get rewarded. But if you've missed out on 10 times as much value creating activity as you return to shareholders, there should be consequences for that. But again, I think a lot of this has to do with time horizon. The average tenure of chief executives and most decision making executives in public corporations is going down, precipitously so. The average holding period of public equities is going down. So we're getting to the point now where the idea that a manager of a corporation has a kind of a long-term stewardship responsibility to it is falling out of fashion in favor of just get in, smash and grab. It's like the management equivalent of Grand Theft Auto. Um, so that's not. I don't think that there's much you can do in that kind of environment. But the irony is, where does the money come from that funds this whole system? There's all these asset managers and intermediaries who do all this short-term trading and all this stuff, but whose money are they investing? Almost all of the money that funds the capital markets is somebody saving for retirement or some kind of multi-generational purpose. So if you think about pension funds and individual retirement accounts and even sovereign wealth funds, family offices, university endowments, like there are these what we call the base of the pyramid, the asset owners who drive this whole system have this incredibly long-term perspective. And yet their interests are not actually being very well represented when you come down to management. In fact, when I speak with managers and I ask them, why is your company so myopically focused on the short term and why is it busy setting value on fire and all this stuff, they mostly will say that's what Wall Street wants. What are you talking about? It's not our decision. And it's like, wait a minute, you're telling me investors want you to intentionally lose money for them? Like something's gone horribly wrong in this system. It's ridiculous.
Yeah, I mean, but I have a couple questions. Let me ask one, then Michele will ask, but I want to come back to this. But before we go on to the kind of the time horizon thing, which I think is so crucial to talk about, let me go back for a moment because Eric, one of the reasons I've loved your work and I love your aspiration is that you believe that large organizations can be entrepreneurial, they
Mhm.
must be entrepreneurial. But let me play the devil's advocate for a moment, which is actually not what I believe, but it's the kind of argument
But
people
but
throw at
you've
me.
heard it a million times. Yeah, let's hear
I've
it.
heard
Let's
it a
hear it.
million times. So what they're going to say is exactly what you're going to say. Say, yeah, large organizations are very good at doing the same things over and over again. Like, God bless them. That's what we want them to do. They're not very good at creating new things. Thank goodness, if you're Coca-Cola, if you whoever you are, you find those little startups, Fairlife Milk, you go out and you buy them, and
Mhm.
then you drive them globally and you help them be far more productive.
Yeah.
That's kind of the way it works. So there's one group of people that says, like, you just shouldn't worry about this, guys. Let those startups grow. When it's time to scale them, somebody will come help do it. The other argument, and I'm not going to name names here, but a lot of innovation pundits and experts have said this. They've said, listen, there's a huge part of the company that just has to run like an engine. if you want to do something new, find the incubator, find the accelerator, isolate it from all those dunderheaded people at head office. And of course, my experience is those things never leverage the strength of the company. They don't grow up to be anything. And you
No.
have a hipster money pit somewhere that doesn't do much. But those are the arguments people would say, like, Eric, it's just naive to believe that we can do this. And so what's your comeback there?
It was a lot easier to make these arguments before Amazon. And now it's just ridiculous. I mean, now there's two kinds of companies. There's companies that are actively competing with Amazon, and there are people that are terrified that they're going to have to compete with Amazon someday in the future. So, like, I don't know. Like, as new people show us what is possible, the argument that we can't do better, kind of falls apart. But like, okay, but maybe, people are like, okay, fine, well, Jeff Bezos could do that, but I never could, or whatever. Okay, so let's take the argument on its face. Like, let's actually get into it. I think it's important to take these arguments seriously and really say, like, what are we really saying about a corporation's capability? So let's go to the data. Like, first, think of this. Let's go to the tape. What does the data show about the success rate of startups that are acquired by big companies? Like, how often do we realize that synergy? It's atrocious. We tend to acquire companies and turn them into ourselves. So we absorb them and we rob them of the innovation, the energy that would be needed to scale up. And there's very few contrary examples. But same with innovation labs. The whole movement towards secret skunk works, it's amazing that there are these famous examples of people building an innovation thing far from headquarters and keeping it secret. And if you notice the pattern, like the creation of, the IBM PC in Boca Raton, like, that can work one time. You get away with it exactly once. And the second you do, you've just sent a memo to every middle manager in the corporation that's like, hey, everybody, just so you know, this is the kind of place that keeps secrets. So in the future, if you're not on the inside, you're on the outside, and you better find out. And we all know middle managers are like ninja assassins; like, they will find you and kill you. So once you do that once, it can't work. So I think we have to really look at the evidence to say that the kind of defense of these bad ideas doesn't really add up. So then let's go to so it's not we have the counterexamples. The evidence that the thing is working is not great. Like, even our average, like, product development hit rate of new products is, like, astonishingly bad. So they did it. The advanced analytics don't support the idea. So let's go to the theory too. Here's a problem. In order to buy startups, you have to be able to do two things. You have to be able to recognize whether they are in fact value creating or not. I mean, right? Is this a straight fraud Ponzi scheme, or is it actually a high growth startup? And you have to, post-acquisition, be able to operate it successfully. So in the current corporate setup, those are considered two different jobs. The evaluation is done by one group and the administration is done by another group. And so when it goes wrong, we can't have any kind of accountability because each group just says it was the other's fault. I mean, you've sat and done that. And so in order to really, like, get this from a level of theory, we have to realize that being able to value and buy a startup successfully is the same skill as being able to have developed the startup in the first place. So we have to develop entrepreneurship as a corporate function, even if I grant the argument that we're never going to do any R&D ourselves and we're going to outsource it entirely to startups. It would be the same challenge we face today. And in fact, if you look at things like pharma, where they have in fact gone down this whole, where, like, the Graham Poobah is telling everybody to completely divest themselves of their R&D capabilities and outsource it to others, it becomes a house of cards because you divest and go to the next set of companies. Those companies are trying to grow, and they're being told by the same consultants to divest of their R&D. And it's like the big fish eats the small fish. And you're like, eventually you get to a point where it's all financial engineering all the way down. And you're like, is anyone actually doing any research to create the next generation set of breakthroughs? I think it's possible actually to drive innovation out of a supply chain, out of a value chain entirely, if you follow that prescription. So it's like we have, it's like refuted by the counterexamples of people that do it well, refuted by the evidence of it not, of the status quo not working well, refuted at the level of theory that there's a contradiction in the heart of it, and yet, on top of all that, people still want to believe it. And again, it always comes back to that people get paid to believe that it's impossible, and that's where I think, again, there's kind of an ideology that we have to crack here to say, no, new, better, more humane things are possible. And investors, managers, employees, we all have to demand more of these organizations.
That's my take as well. But I still think there are a lot of leaders who take refuge in that kind of explanation that allows them to externalize this problem or avoid this problem of doing the both and.
Yeah, I mean, and it's like, if it was either or, it would be easy. Like, why do you think you get paid the big bucks? Business is hard. That's why I'm paid to do it. The other I will say one thing. There's one hopeful thing that I took away, and I don't have the details in front of me. This is a study that was done a few years ago about whether are managers primarily self-dealing, or do they try to do their best? And someone found a clever study design. It had to do with some bit of M&A theory. I'm forgetting now the specifics, but it was basically like a specific idea that came into vogue in business schools at different times. And so they could look at whether managers who graduated from those business schools did or did not adopt that idea in situations where it would or would not have been in their self-interest to do so. And the thing that really astonished me, I would have said this is, it doesn't, I'm pretty negative on business school education. And this actually gave me pause when I saw the study, because basically they were able to show empirically that the vast majority of managers basically are just trying to do a good job. Like, they have a set of conventional ideas that they have been taught about what it means to be a good manager, and they are trying to actualize those as best they can. And the inertia and sense of hopelessness we sometimes have when we're trying to change and reform organizations, like, actually has this kind of mundane cause lurking there, which is that this whole concept, when we say like companies are, how many human beings' brains are we really talking about? We say we have to change the culture of business. Like, how many people we talk? It's not like, this is not like changing, fashion, where you have to change hundreds of millions of people. There aren't that many senior managers in the whole world, let alone in an advanced economy like this. It's a lot of people, and they're powerful, and they're stuff. But actually, it is a tractable problem. These are people who are interested in results, and they are trying to do their best. And so I think the question we got to really ask ourselves is, are we the advocates of change? Have we actually done a good job articulating, advancing, working together to create that new standard that we want people to be held to? And I think there's a lot of work to be done there. Obviously, many of us have been advocates for our own theories, but like, have we, if it was really as urgent as we said it is, wouldn't we put our differences aside? Wouldn't we have created a united front? Wouldn't we try to adopt common vocabulary, language, and standards? Like, I just think there's a lot that we can do still. A lot of the weapons of an intellectual war here that have not yet been picked up as we wage this battle. So I against all odds, against all evidence of my eyes, I'm actually optimistic about what is possible, because I think we haven't really truly joined the fight yet.
I hope you're enjoying the conversation. There's more of it to come. I just wanted to take a moment to thank Haier, the world's largest appliance maker and a global leader in the Internet of Things, for underwriting the costs of producing this interview. It's great to work with a partner who is so deeply committed to building organizations that elicit and deserve the very best that human beings can give. Now, back to our conversation.
When we were writing our book, Eric, we went back in management history to the 40s, the 50s, and 60s. And we were just amazed. I mean, some of this we knew, but as we got deeper, it became even more shocking at the level of hope and ambition that, Maslow, McGregor, Likert, all those, Argyris had about humanizing work and creating organizations that were, much more capable of unleashing the potential that kind of you alluded to.
Yeah.
And yet, I mean, they're obviously all renowned and held in great esteem, but their vision has yet to be realized. And there was
and most of them ended their careers fairly bitter, because
bitter, and cynical,
why?
because they could see that they could change a bit of an institution, and or like a plant or a department, and as soon as like that changed leadership, things reverted back to authoritarianism. Or they now we're all into like mindfulness and other kinds of mindset kind of training. But in the 50s and 60s and 70s, there were tens of thousands of managers who would spend 2 weeks doing sensitivity training. They would be reborn, come back and say, "Oh, I've been such an asshole. I'm just going to make amends with everybody I work with." And, for the first 6 months, that's what happened. And then they reverted back to type, because it is, and some of the companies that we even talk about it in our book, and that very well, like a Nucor or a Southwest or W.L. Gore, and more recently Haier, they've been beacons of this kind of more progressive way of managing and leading and organizing for decades. So, like, I'm hopeful too. I don't want to be completely cynical, but I'm also mindful of the fact that this is like a wicked problem, right? There are all these different
Yeah,
components that, in a way, and it's not a big conspiracy, as you say, but they just, keep the system inertial, right?
that's right. That's right.
And so now we're all looking for, like, what are the leverage points, right?
Mhm.
How do we make sure that this is not like the 1960s or 70s when people were hoping, the management revolution was just around the corner? Like, how do we make sure that this time is really
Yeah.
different? Because, like,
I'm
more
I
so
I'm
than
really
ever.
glad you asked that. I think most of us who talk a big game here simply lack the scope of ambition to really see change through, and so have many of our historical predecessors. They became rich and famous themselves, they had a great career, they changed some organizations, it was pretty nice, and then that was it.
Mm.
The forces of status quo enjoyed us as the dinner entertainment. We're like, we passed through, we entertained, and we did our part. We got paid, and we're in the same category as a musician or a good artist. And like nothing wrong with that. I have tremendous esteem for the arts, but many of us who do this aspire to more than literary greatness. Now, there was a book that came out a couple years ago called The Enlightened Capitalists, and it was a great book because it was like a case study book of 150 years of people trying to do well by doing good with enlightened management practices. And it's the most depressing book you'll ever read because it's basically it's just case study after case study, starting back with like English mining companies in the 1860s. Someone figures out, hey, if you treat workers with respect, you get better results. Tried to evangelize, did turned around a failing mine, got great results, tried to evangelize it all around England, and everyone hated his guts because he showed a better way, and that actually made people angry. And in this first opportunity, investors came in, bought him out, put the practices back, and destroyed the progress. And it's that same story now for more than 100 years. So what I think those stories have in common, and again, you always see people trying to do the one-off thing, my idea, my organization, my institution, my book, my theory. And when are we going to learn that this is a revolution? Those of us who are advocating making common cause, we have to find ways to work together to find these leverage points and really push on them. So that means incentive design, it means policy, it means, I spend my day trying to build a new stock exchange. We have to change the regulation, the corporate governance, everything about this. And unless we're willing to enlist all of the potential allies into that cause, political allies, we talked about our financial allies, I talked about the long-term investors, like there's a lot of stakeholders who would like to see this come to fruition. But are we really prepared to do the work to see the more radical change through? And I think that's what we have to find is we have to stop looking for the quick win, the silver bullet, and say, like, how do we sustain a movement towards this over the course of the next several generations? Like, I'm not sure that any of us will live to see this through. So if we understand that we're trying to build a cathedral here, what are the steps we have to take now to lay that foundation?
Yeah, I think that's it seems to us, Eric, that's exactly the right way to think about it because
Thank you.
I say to my colleagues in business schools, I say, we all suffer from ADD, ambition deficit disorder. And
Amen.
it's like
Amen.
as good as organizations are being run right now, well, maybe we can improve it a little bit. And you pick your example du jour and say, well, go thou and do likewise. But like, what if they all suck? And so, our starting point, and I'd like to throw this then back to you on where you see these big levers, but our starting point is you are going to need to have investors involved, regulators involved, business
Yeah,
schools involved, unions involved, corporate CEOs involved,
absolutely.
because there is a kind of bureaucratic confederacy. And I don't want to make it sound like this, like some deep conspiracy, but there's a whole set of players who are, locked into the status quo. By the way, we got to recognize that this works for a lot of people. And when you have a system that works for the few better than the many, the few are going to kind of like hang on to that for a while. That was true for patriarchy, for slavery, for aristocracy. It's not like, everybody's just going to say like, good, let's do this.
That's right.
But you do have to attack it from multiple points.
Yeah, from
And,
all
one of the things that's been inspiring to us is if you look at big science and how that's worked over the last few years with the Human Genome Project, the Human Cell Project, and so on, where people are setting aside their institutional loyalties, their individual, and coming together and solving these immensely complex problems. Unless we can think about pulling on multiple levers and collaborating in new ways at a new scale, like I just think we're stuck. So does that make sense? And within that, maybe tell us where you think the real levers are.
That is 100% right. And if you want a historical precedent, I always go back to the creation of scientific management. What's astonishing to me to read the original source material, Frederick Winslow Taylor and his colleagues, like most people learn about Taylorism through a textbook that criticizes their mistakes. And look, it's 100 years ago. They made a ton of mistakes. It's full of bad ideas. But the basic insight to apply the scientific method to find the best way of working, to unlock human potential that was wasted in guilds and monopoly unions and stuff, like that was such a core insight. It was amazing. And yet they didn't just like publish a book about it and then be like, done, I did my work. They were obsessed. The amount of experimentation and research that they did, all funded out of the gains of that research by private industry, by the way, was like they would run tens of thousands of experiments for stuff that we take for granted. I'm like, when was the last time anyone in the modern economy cared even 10% as much about finding the actual empirical answers to the hard questions that face us as managers? I think, I think the scale of what they were trying to do, as many mistakes as they made, just completely dwarfs anything that is being undertaken today. It's embarrassing.
Yeah, they likened it to a crusade, and the interesting thing, Eric, about that period also is that efficiency became like a morally uh,
Mhm,
a just a goal, right? It was the thing to do. Eliminate waste.
mhm.
That is what the key to a just society is all about, right? So it got elevated to a societal priority, right? That then got reflected in the progressive movement and
Mhm.
jurisprudence and politics, and so it just created a kind of ideological infrastructure for it to spread.
Mhm.
Aside from
That's
its
right.
practical benefits, right? And so
That's
I
right.
still don't think we have that right now when it comes to
No, no,
humanizing work.
we've inherited the idea of efficiency as good, but we don't even take it as seriously as they did. I mean, and again, and we certainly haven't made no attempt to replace it with a new moral philosophy. And it means that our corporations are primarily spineless, morally speaking, and can't
But
figure out
back
what
to
to do.
Danny's point, I think there are people like Douglas McGregor and others that did have a run at that, right? I mean, Theory X, Theory Y, that had
Yep,
plenty of
sure.
currency, and even today, everybody's going to know, have some sense of that. But I think the mechanisms, the tools we had for large scale change were lacking, and
Hmm.
I think we do have a new set of tools that allows us to tackle very complex problems in
Yes.
new ways. Now, having said that, we've seen some pretty amazing change, right? We racism is with us, but we did dismantle a lot of the infrastructure of slavery. Patriarchy is still with us, but we're working, I think, hard to change that, and so on. So, but you're right. For whatever reason, Eric, it hasn't yet kind of gotten elevated to a crusade.
Yeah. And I do think part of it is about we've taught a kind of an apolitical ideology in business schools and to business leaders that I think has served us very poorly. So generally speaking, like the circular reasoning of like on the one hand, you say like the obligation of a manager is simply to maximize shareholder value. Whatever society permits is permissible, and it's not your job to think about that. It's politicians and policymakers' job to think about that. And then like you take that class and you're like, okay, got it. And then you take a new class, like, now here's how to spend your corporate dollars lobbying effectively to have the rules changed to make you make more money. And it's like, well, you can't have both. We're just going around and around the circle. It's like if we control the laws, then we have a moral obligation to see that they're good. And not so we can't hide behind that. I think we have to be willing to say, look, we have political allies who are trying to build a more humane society. And and again, the connection between efficiency and scientific management and progressivism, like that was a social goal to produce social outcomes. And so we have to say, and our employees get this way better than managers right now. Like we're living through an era of employee activism where it's no longer acceptable to leave your politics behind. And people are saying, no, I insist that the company I work for be purpose oriented, have real values that it will stand up and speak in defense of. That's what it means for me to feel engaged and willing to contribute. As we move into a knowledge work economy, especially, like my creativity is a scarce resource, and so I'm prepared to bargain for who gets to exploit that. And so I think there is a new like burbling idea that we could try to build something better. But I think most managers right now are seeing this as just like an outrage machine. And your goal is just to avoid the outrage, or like whatever the mob wants for you, try to placate them as best you can. And it's not a principled defense of what's needed. So if I could throw an idea at you, here's how I would phrase it. I think we have to build a new civic religion. Like I actually think the word religion is correct here. This is a set of articles of faith that bind together the most enlightened version of liberal democracy and market capitalism and multi-stakeholder governance and long-term thinking. and meld that into a set of institutions that can defend those values that are currently under assault right this minute. Um, in the same way our grandparents had to forge that new consensus and new institutions in the wake of the calamities that they lived through. And it's eerie to be entering into into the 2020s knowing what happened in the 1920s. Like, I think we really have to wake up and say they had to go through some pretty severe trauma in order to figure out what needed to be done. And our question right now is, like, can we build the alliance that will be needed to build these institutions before we experience the same level of trauma that they did? I think it's very much an open question.
And I think, I know you use the word religion carefully, but I think it is also the right word. When we went back and we looked at how these other kind of very inequitable social systems kind of ultimately got changed, things that locked up and wasted vast quantities of human capability, none of them changed primarily because of a utilitarian argument. They
No.
changed because at some point somebody said it's wrong, right? It's
Well,
wrong
wrong.
to treat people
Absolutely
like
wrong. You have to stand up and say this is wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, you have to say it's wrong. And I think, people can kind of take you as a kook or take you as a crusader, but I do think you have to say that. And I think, leaders have to say that. But it does require, let me also say, if you go back and you look at those changes, the people that led them were not really the people that had a big stake in the old model. And so I think that's, who's out in front leading this? Are we waiting for the bureaucrats to uninstall bureaucracy?
Yeah, it's
That
not
could
very
be a long
likely.
way.
I wouldn't hold your breath. So here's what I think is, I do think this, here's an optimistic take on it though. Because of technologically driven disruption, we are going to turn over a high percentage of our institutions anyway, whether we want to or not. The turnover, I mean, the mortality rate of institutions is unbelievable right now. So what do newspapers, unions, universities, schools, libraries, hospitals, what do all these institutions have in common? Hotels. Like, I could go on and on. There's like this long list of institutions that have all suddenly, political parties have suddenly recently in the last 15 or 20 years gone through a total crisis where they have like suddenly just ceased to operate effectively in a way that people are just like, what's going on? It's very strange. I mean, really think about like secular stagnation. What is that? Just, it's an admission that like somehow like things have just stopped working in some deep way. And if you actually zoom in on each institution, you can see that it's kind of a similar problem. We built institutions whose economic logic was based on scarcity, gatekeeper control of resources that had to be shared because they were scarce, and all the attendant bureaucracy that you have to build out of that. As simple as like there's only one MRI machine and you have to really time slice schedule it really well. And teachers are incredibly scarce. Knowledge is scarce. Like hotel rooms are unbelievably scarce. Political parties, the attention, the like journalistic attention that would needed to figure out which candidates, like all this stuff. Its economic logic is just unspooled before our eyes. And here's the thing I think is really interesting. So in each of these areas, we are currently turning over institutions. So we've replaced a bunch of newspapers with Facebook. We're replacing hotels with Airbnb. And of course, it's not like you instantaneously snap your fingers and the old thing dies and the new thing comes, but there's like a gradual erosion to the new thing. So we're going to change. Now, what's interesting is people, all these grand poobahs and defenders of bureaucracy have this kind of, it's a very Panglossian idea that just everything's going to turn out for the best. So yes, the disruption is painful, but the new institution will basically embody the same civic values as the old institution and we'll be fine. And what we are now learning the hard way is that is simply not true. There is absolutely no guarantee at all that the new institutions will not be governed by complete psychopaths. It's like you have no guarantee. The civic values that were instilled in these older institutions sometimes was a result of far-sighted leadership, and sometimes it was just an accident of history. So we're going to do all this turnover. I think this next generation of entrepreneurs, civic entrepreneurs as well as business entrepreneurs, are incredibly important, because if they have the civic values embedded in them, if they really have that mindset and vision for a more positive civic fabric for the society they live in, then the new institutions could embody better. It could actually be better than what we had before. But if we just leave this to the kind of the free market plus marketplace of ideas, like we are really playing Russian roulette with our civilization.
That's been this long thing of, we keep improving our technology without improving our purposes. Mm-hmm. And, that only means we get to multiply the impact of bad ideas and the psychopaths rather than moving society forward. But, that does suggest you end up, I mean, the good news is you look back and you do see where collectively we have become potentially more enlightened on some issues like sustainability. We have become maybe more other focused, better able to
Yeah.
encompass and respect diversity. So I think there's reasons to be hopeful that this can happen. But as you say, it takes a bigger aspiration. It takes I don't want to say a coordinated, but it takes a multi kind of a
Yeah.
constituent effort to do it, which has been lacking. And so hoping, Drucker and Michele dug this out. I didn't know, but Drucker wrote like 20 some years ago that by now we'd have half the level of half the number of managers and like a third the number of layers in organizations. It's gone exactly the other way.
Mhm.
Bureaucratic class is bigger proportionally than it's ever been before. The average large company has eight layers. And so it's not like this is going to happen just kind of like automatically and
Yeah, there's
without
no
people
nothing is
IQ
automatic.
and
I agree.
Yeah.
Here's one crazy idea. I'll throw this out there. I just can't get over this. People extrapolate from the present into the future and figure like, being a bureaucratic manager is a pretty good gig because it's growing. But we have these counter examples trying to seep in. And I was talking about Amazon before, but take the example of Uber for a second. If you're an Uber driver, who's your boss? And of
well,
course, Uber
sadly,
is
perhaps the algorithm. You
yeah,
you and the algorithm.
yeah. You are told what to do by a piece of software. It's actually a piece of artificial intelligence. It's a kind of a symbiont that is part computer, part computer engineer. But like you have no labor rights with regard to the algorithm. You can't talk to it or negotiate it. So imagine that there was a bug in the Uber algorithm one day. Like imagine your name had a funny character in it, or you had something was strange about your user profile, and there's a bug in the algorithm, and it can't route work to you for some reason. Like you could be in a busy intersection. There's 100 other Uber drivers getting jobs constantly. You're looking around being like, why don't I ever get a job? So you've basically been blackballed from your job. You've been effectively fired. What's your recourse? Who can you talk to about that? Who would even notice or care? And of course, the way that debate is being framed in our elite circles is like, oh, poor Uber drivers. But I always tell middle managers, like, pay attention. This is coming for you. Like inhuman, impersonal management of resource with like that was part of Taylor's dream too. That was kind of the dark side of it. And he didn't have the technological capability to treat humans like robots. That didn't exist then, but boy, do we have it now. And if a company wanted to adopt this like totally inhumane, time sliced, no recourse, no rights, like works, like they could. We have the capability for it. So someone's going to try it. Now, we could use that technology to unleash an unbelievable amount of creativity if we wanted to, right? That could be the basis of eliminating tons of managers that are unnecessary for making entrepreneurship a human right, giving everyone the chance to experiment and test and try new things. Of course, it would have to be accompanied by a dramatic escalation in the social safety net to support people taking the kinds of risks that this would expose them to. But so what? It would be so productive, it would more than pay for that, no problem. Or we could be heading for dystopia 101 here. And it actually is today's managers who get to decide.
Maybe we sum up here now, and Michele, I want you to have the last word. But what you're saying is we are facing either digital Taylorism or digital emancipation. And in a way, that choice is up to us. I think the current system, I know which way its biases run. We've already seen some of that. So it is going to take a fairly heroic, concerted effort by people who care about this to make sure we end up on the right side of that, the right side of that divide.
Oh, you said it beautifully.
Yeah.
That's
Well,
completely
the only
correct.
thing I would say, just again, maybe to end on a hopeful note, is as you were talking, Eric, I was reminded of a company we studied in great detail, which is Nucor. They're the largest steel maker in the
Mhm.
U.S.
Sure.
They are the largest adopter of automation technology in the industry.
Mhm.
And it's the workers, the steel workers, who are the first ones to highlight opportunities to automate processes
Mhm.
because of a couple of things. First, they get paid on their productivity. So
Yeah.
it's stupid for them to do things that are like, not very
Yeah, and
effective
why
for
is that
them.
not standard practice by now? For
Well,
God's sake, right?
right. No, right.
How long
So,
have we known that was a good idea?
right. And then the other thing is that, there is this social contract whereby Nucor, even though they're in a highly cyclical industries and that all their competitors always cut labor costs when there's a
They
downturn,
won't do it. They won't do it.
they will never do it. They have never laid people off. they cut the work week, not the workforce. And we were talking to John Ferriola, the CEO. He now has retired. Uh, and I asked him, like, have you ever gotten pressure from your investors, right? To, because they're a public company.
Yeah.
And he said we only toyed with the idea once in 2008 when there was a
Mhm.
total collapse of
Yeah,
demand.
the total meltdown.
And they said we could have like made a profit because that was the only loss making year since they started going in business. We could have made a profit that year by cutting a few people off, but we never did that. And no investor demanded that of us because they completely understand that the reason why we're so successful and so productive is because we have this social contract with the workforce, and we leverage their capability and we invest in it for the long haul, which
Mhm.
again demonstrates to me that if you have a management team that gets it, that puts people at the center of the
Absolutely.
organization and sees
Absolutely.
them as the engines of progress, and if you have investors who get it, there is hope. And
Hey,
John
you
Ferriola.
just articulated our business thesis for the long-term stock exchange. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Let's bring the
Well,
companies and the investors who get it together for common benefit, and let's leave everybody else behind. We'll actually make more money this way. That's the thing that's so crazy to me. It's not some like pie
yeah,
in the sky crazy thing about whatever socialism. It's like we're going to make more money by just
yeah.
running our companies better.
So
What's so
Eric, let me
controversial
just
about that?
let me ask you though, like, I'm asking you to restate something you already said, but if the alternative is so great, and if there are models and there are, like,
Yeah.
why is Nucor like the lone exponent of this in their industry? Why is everybody else still doing it the wrong way?
It's really difficult. People have been taught a certain way, and they're
Mm,
making a lot of money from it, and they're afraid
mm,
that they'll be punished if they change. Because if you're a corporate drone and you do what you're told and you get promoted, like it's just a very safe, it's like an annuity. It's a very safe investment. If you try something different and it doesn't work and you become a pariah, like that's really scary. Now, in reality, it's not that bad. Most of these people are highly employable and it works out fine, but it can feel really terrifying. So part of this is simply we have to create a conducive container for those who want to make these changes to try them to do so in a way that's safe. I mean, in the startup way, I advocate for seeing corporate transformation as a corporate capability. That is, companies should be experimenting with new corporate forms all the time, so that when new ideas come in, it's not like an all or nothing bet the company thing. You treat it the way you would treat any entrepreneurial opportunity, through experimentation and testing and then rapid scaling, if and only if you prove its viability. So
By the
I
way,
think
Eric,
we're missing that infrastructure.
yeah.
if you look back at management history and you look at the companies that really enjoyed success over decades and decades, and this would be companies like GE,
Yep.
IBM, to some extent GM. There was a period of time from the 1910s up to the 1970s, perhaps. Those companies spent more time thinking about how they were managing and leading and so on than they did about products and technology. And they were experimenting with new structures and new
Oh, all the
compensation.
time. I mean, again,
But at
read
some
Alfred Sloan's
point, most of
autobiography. It
that,
was shocking. Shocking
yeah,
when I
at
first
some
time I read
point
it.
that just ran out of steam.
Yeah. We just stopped
Yeah.
doing it. It became, obviously the business ideology of the 80s was so antithetical to that.
Right.
But also, but the idea of the social contract just mentioned in Nucor. I mean, for God's sake, I think that was in The Machine That Changed the World. It came out in the 80s. This is not. We have had the evidence for this
Not
for a
new.
long time. Those were best-selling books. Like, people have known. So I think we have to look deeper than just, are people ignorant, and really ask ourselves, like, who's profiting from this and who's creating
Exactly.
a counterweight. Like,
Yep.
what is the movement that is pushing on the other side of the scale to say, no, we insist that this be changed? And again, I'll just tell you one last little story. You guys remember Virgin America, the airline?
I
It's
loved
Virgin
it.
America. Yeah.
I mourned it when it went away.
Every person, we all feel the same way. So it had just so happened the day the merger was announced, that they were going to basically be destroyed. I happened to be in Washington D.C. Lobbying, for long-term thinking and all the stuff that I do. And I spent the whole day with grand poobahs and policymakers and fancy people all day long. And every fancy person I met was like, "Is this really a problem? I don't know. Maybe it'll be fine." I mean, I heard the most ridiculous people like, "Well, when the Fed raises interest rates, everything will fix itself." And just like, it was like one just so story after another about why change would never be needed and everything is fine. And I was a really demoralizing day. And I get to the check-in counter I'm flying Virgin America that day. I check in DC for my flight to San Francisco, and the baggage handlers and flight attendants are like lounging around the ticket counter talking about the merger. And so I just asked, I'm checking in, hey, how are you all feeling about the merger? And the person, just a random person taking my ticket, looks at me straight in the eye. She's like, oh, well, Wall Street, short-term thinking, the like quarterly results, the bad incentive. They had a complete and totally accurate diagnosis of what had happened. They were like, they were like, looked at me like I was the naive one. What did you expect would happen? We didn't have complete control of the company because of these bad regulations. And then these investors got involved, and then this happened. And then like, that's just, they didn't say like, that's American capitalism in a nutshell, but they may as well have. And I almost fell over. I was like, the emperor actually has no clothes. The people who do the actual work in this country understand what's going on. And those of us who have been elite educated have at least some kind of mental block. So I think we have a moral obligation to rectify that. And that is going to be an all hands on deck effort. We have to get business leaders. You said it, business leaders and policymakers and educators. We all got to get together here and say, enough is enough. We got to take a stand for what we know to be right. And if we don't do that, like what kind of world are our kids going to inherit from us? What do we really have to lose? I think it's long overdue.
As Ralph Waldo Emerson said, he said there's always two parties, the establishment and the movement. And each of us gets to choose which side of that we're on. So Eric, thank you. It's like just a ton for like motivating us and others and sharing some of this and having a call to arms. It's like long overdue. And I have no doubt it is going to move the needle.
Thank you. Thank you for saying so. And of course, I really appreciate your leadership in the space for many years now. So I hope we get to be comrades in arms for many years to come.